Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome back to Just the News, No Noise. We've done plenty of stories about how woefully bad the education system in America is right now. It really is in terrible shape. And now we have even more evidence to back that up. The American Council of Trustees and Alumni have released a new survey that shows an incredible number of American college students know absolutely nothing about how our government works. The survey shows that 60% of college students surveyed do not know the term limit lengths of members of United States Congress. Only 35% know that Mike Johnson is the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Only 27% correctly identify Kamala Harris as the president of the U.S. Senate. Now, with us to talk about these shocking numbers and why our students don't know more about our system of government is Campus Reform Higher Education Fellow and Professor of Political Science at Suffolk Community College in New York, Nick Giordano. Professor, great to see you, sir. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
When did this begin and who does it benefit? Because I have to think that it benefits all Americans to know about their government, to know civics, to know how it works. But I got to think that it benefits someone for students to not know.
Yeah, that would make sense, that we actually know about the country that we're living in. Unfortunately, that's not taking place. Our education system was founded by Horace Mann, who believed that civics is the primary responsibility of an education system. Now, when we say civics, we're talking about how our government functions and our role and responsibility within the system. Unfortunately, only 13% of students demonstrate proficiency in American history, 22% demonstrate proficiency in American government and civics. Only 6% of my students can pass the citizenship exam, and I've reported on Campus Reform how most cannot distinguish between the American Constitution from the Russian Constitution. Now, when the majority of people don't know the country that they're living in and the government that is supposed to be the one that governs us, how can that country possibly survive? And we are feeling the effects, this far left ideology, the diversity, equity, inclusion that has replaced civics to push a political agenda, and it's wreaked havoc within our communities. Just take civics organizations. These organizations like the Knights of Columbus or the Lions Club, they used to do wonderful things in the community, and they still do, but the membership is dying off because young people are unaware that these organizations even exist. And these organizations rise above politics. Their membership consists of Republicans and Democrats, where they join together, they have dialogue with each other, they engage in events, and they solve community problems. But because we don't teach civics, students don't know these organizations exist, and they disengage from the process. And what does that mean? It means that we become strangers within our own community. And if you notice, it appears that every single issue today becomes federalized because people don't know how the system works. They can't explain the very basics of federalism, which is our form of government. We've seen the family breakdown. We've seen the church pews that are emptying out, and none of this has improved our society. So it's had a devastating, profound effect. And if you correlate the decline in civics, well, look at our political discourse. It's gotten worse and worse with that correlation.
Mm-hmm. Nick, I want to ask about the effect. We all generally know that we elect our officials and that we choose our nominees by a primary system where voters make the decision. 14.5 million people vote for Joe Biden, and then when the Democrats like, oh, he did so bad in debate, we just got to get rid of him, they just replace him without an election. How does that play into this sort of not only civics ignorance, but maybe civics distrust?
Well, it's remarkable, especially at a time where we hear from academics, the media, the Democrat Party itself about the threats to democracy. And they basically just murdered democracy. I mean, you know, how can you sit there and justify taking the guy who actually got votes off the ticket and replacing him, having a coronation and saying the vice president, Kamala Harris, is essentially the presumptive nominee without any debates, without any voting? How does that jive with democratic principles? And it doesn't. And it shows that people have little regard for the democratic principles that were built into the republic, where we, the people, are the ones that get to decide our political leaders. Unfortunately, with this case, we see it's really the party bosses. It actually takes us back into time where the party bosses had much more influence over the people, over their nominees than the people did. And so we're seeing this complete and utter disregard, and yet they're going to go out there and champion the idea of democracy. I don't know how they do that. That's hypocrisy at its finest. And every American should be extremely upset that if you are a Democrat voter, you've been lied to for years, you didn't have an opportunity to have a say in who your nominee is now. And how does that jive going forward? How does that strengthen our country? And it doesn't. It actually weakens our country. It makes us a mockery on the international world stage, where America can no longer preach from the moral high ground about functioning governments and free societies, because the tactics that we've seen over the last several years are more reminiscent of the Communist Chinese Party.
So amazing. So
Professor, before we let you go, I've seen a trend with Republicans, which is just basically common sense policies. And I think it started under Donald Trump in his first term in office. But I just saw that the Nevada Culinary Union came out and endorsed his policy on no tax on tips, the policy that he announced at his own rally there last month. It seems like these are the types of ideas that are catching fire for Republicans, doesn't it?
Well, they really should be, in a sense, because if we look at this idea of taxation, we started a revolution against England because of this very issue, and we are being taxed at a much higher level today than ever before. Nobody likes to pay taxes, and so it is common sense. We keep on funding the federal government that's growing bigger and bigger and bigger, and yet we're seeing incompetence and failure at the highest levels because the government shifts focus to DEI agendas, right? We look at almost an assassination of a former president and presidential candidate where a Secret Service director was more interested in diversity, equity, inclusion than actual operational excellence. And so there is a risk to every American. This does affect us all, and that's why we need to pay attention. That's why we need to call for stronger civic engagement, understanding the system that we're living in, and understand the root principles of the idea of limited government that the founders preached so much about. Because when governments become too big and too bloated, that's when authoritarian and incompetence seep in.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Professor, we love your work. We love your work in the classroom at Campus Reform. I hope thousands more students sign up for your class so that you can mold these young minds and teach them civics, because they obviously are not getting it anywhere else. Professor Nick Giordano from Campus Reform, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll have you back on again very soon.
Lady Liberty. She looks good, doesn't she? Well, civil society has deteriorated over the last 3 decades as people have withdrawn from civic life, and the root cause of this trend lies in our failed election system and education system, which has substituted nation-building civic education with destructive activism, as we've seen all over the country. Our education system was created to cultivate the next generation, to build, strengthen, and defend our nation, and create people that understood liberty, not just by voting and paying taxes, but by participating in the structures that make up a civil society: family, faith, community, organizations, and charity. Today, we're suffering from the repercussions of an education system that has turned its back on this purpose in our families and communities, and they're suffering as a result. Here with me now to discuss this further is Campus Reform Higher Education Fellow and Professor of Political Science at Suffolk Community College in the great state of New York. Here we are, Professor. Good to have you here. Tell me, Professor Giordano, how did we get to this place in the conversation? How did all of these institutions get undermined?
Well, you had a far-left ideological takeover. So at first there was the transition of actual teachers that were subject matter experts in their field, leaving the profession and being replaced with ideological zealots. Then we started to see, when it comes to civics, a focus on the STEM programs over our history and civics, and it's had a profound effect. I mean, most Americans are unaware, but only 13% of students demonstrate proficiency in American history, and only 22% demonstrate proficiency in civics. And civics is the structure of our government, how it functions, the original intent behind it, and our role within the system. We're constantly saying what the government should be doing, but students today don't ask themselves, well, what's our role? And it's really had problems. At Campus Reform, we just reported on a survey where most students have no idea who their member of Congress is. They don't know 3 branches of government. I know 6% of my students, only 6% could pass a basic citizenship exam, and most can't distinguish between the American Constitution and the Russian Constitution. How can we as a country survive if the majority of its citizens don't know anything about it? And so we're seeing the real-time results of people withdrawing from civic life, withdrawing and disengaging from our process. And that's why you see, I mean, we've been on top of the campus demonstrations where students are protesting and chanting "Death to America." This is what it's devolved into, and that's what happens when you don't have a strong, robust civics curriculum.
Yeah, and death to America. We just saw, 35 members of Congress today that skipped listening to Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of our closest ally, of the only democracy in all of the Middle East, and they ignore it. This is not the new normal. And you're right. People that come to this country, legal immigrants, know more about this country and the 3 branches of government and the civics that should be second nature to all Americans. They know more about it. Many Americans don't know anything. Well, it's in the Constitution. They say, you've heard people say, oh, that's what the Constitution says.
Well, here's
You've never read it. People have never read the document. Go ahead.
In over 13 years of education, by the time they get to my classroom, every single student should be almost able to rehearse the Constitution word for word. But when I ask them, how come you don't know it? They say, well, we were never assigned to read it. And that to me is tragic. James Madison said that a diffusion of knowledge is the only true guardian against liberty. And we're suffering as a result. Look at our political discourse. Our political discourse is at horrible levels, but it's because our civic foundation is falling flat. You take civic organizations like the Knights of Columbus or the Lions Club, the Elks. They're aging out. The membership is getting older and older. Young people are unaware these organizations exist, but these organizations rise above Democrat-Republican politics, where all members come together. They help their other members out when they need. They help and improve the community when they need. They have social functions where we could get together and talk about issues without being at each other's throats. But as these civic organizations die out, well, so does the discourse. And that's what we're witnessing on a grand scale.
Yeah, vigorous discourse, because not everybody. You're not. I'm not. But too many people are afraid. I just want to close. They want to hear. They're afraid of a conversation, Professor, and that, to me, is the most frightening thing of all. Real quickly, I'll give you the last word.
Well, that's why so many people retreat to the echo chambers. They only want to hear opinions that validate their opinion. They only seek out information that tells them they're right. And so when someone comes along and says, well, I disagree with you, they don't know how to handle it because they're so deeply ingrained within that echo chamber. And that's the problem.
Correct.
We need to fix the failing civics programs that our schools abandoned a long time ago.
I'll make it easy on you. I agree with you. See, there you go. So I agree with you. Professor Nick Giordano, greatly appreciate you as always. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
We'll talk again soon. He's a great guy.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.